Hey everyone, my name is Mark Moyou and I'm a senior data scientist at NVIDIA. And today I'm going to be talking to you about starting and accelerating your data science career. And one of the main reasons I'm producing this particular talk is to just share some of the things that I've gathered along the way in my career. And hopefully they help you to both start and accelerate your data science career. On the bottom of the screen, you'll see this thing called Caribbean Data Science Podcast. If you can find me there, it's available on YouTube, Apple, and Spotify. So let's jump in. The first thing I would say as we jump in is these opinions are my own. They're based on my own journey. So as I'm saying here, take what you need, leave the rest. My intention is to just share as much as I can so that you can accelerate your journey. So just keep that in mind. It has nothing to do with my employers, just me trying to contribute to the community. So in terms of agenda, right, we just have two big blocks, so to say. We're going to talk about starting versus accelerating. And then I'm going to recap a presentation that I've done before called Becoming the Best Data Scientist That You Can Be. And that's just sort of a high level things that you should just be looking out for as you move along. Starting versus accelerating. And as you start thinking about data science and why data science, here's some of my points. Interesting work, meaning you can go to many different domains. The problems are challenging, both from a modeling perspective, in addition to actually getting really good data to work with, depending on the size of company that you go to. And sometimes it could be frustrating if you're at a smaller company, meaning you don't have as much resources and you can't get things to production as quickly as possible. But also, sometimes when you get to a larger company, you get to work on a very specific piece of the architecture or piece of the problem. And there's just many places that you can go. In terms of impact, I'm saying that it's high impact because the small things that you work on can end up driving a large set of results. So for instance, if you're in recommendation systems, you might come up with a particular model that ends up increasing the revenue of the business by 2 or 3%, which is a lot for some businesses, especially large ones. Next is good pay. Good pay meaning if you do really good work and you work for a very strong company, strong when I say strong, financially strong, oftentimes data scientists or people coming to the field expect these super high salaries, but you always have to keep in mind the economics of the business and what the business can afford and the general marketplace, okay, in addition to your skills. But if you're good, you will get paid quite well. And lastly, as I sort of mentioned close to the beginning, is that you can have many careers across different industries. And as you'll see in this presentation, I've hopped across different industries, and keeping your fundamentals will really help you to have a great career. So the first thing, getting into data science is the hardest part, right? Getting the coveted title of data analyst, data scientist, it is hard. And I think you should always remember that it's really not easy. It will take a lot of work. No one can necessarily guarantee where your break will come from. So you have to do as much as possible for you to increase the chances that you'll get one of those positions. Don't be afraid to go to a smaller company, because the moment that you get the title of data scientist, let's say on LinkedIn, you've now sort of proven to the marketplace that, hey, a business is investing in you, okay? Or a business is asking you to solve a particular problem and they're willing to pay you X amount, right? Sometimes you might be getting paid a lot, or you might be doing super interesting work, but ultimately you're getting more experience than outside of school, okay? When it comes to getting a job, the always best time is to get one while you have one, simply because you have more leverage. You're not stressed out, and you can be very aggressive, let's say, in the types of jobs you go after and the pay that you're asking for and whatnot. Next is focusing on your skills. And what I really try to highlight here is sometimes it's not about the pay when you go to a job or you get a job. Ultimately, focus on your learning in the first couple of years. And that's what I've been focusing on. a lot, yeah, you focus on salary as well, but always thinking about what can I learn and how is that going to set the foundation for the next, set of years or the next set of jumps or the next set of pivots that you're going to make in your career. Connections matter. You're going to see that come up almost too much in the slides. And that has been one of the keys to my success, networking. Okay. And we're going to jump a lot into it. But ultimately, I think it's something that you need to take seriously from today, not necessarily, or when I finish graduate, you should be, if you're in school, you should be networking all from then. And as a professional, you should be networking practically almost every day, in my opinion. And not necessarily making new connections and all these things, but ultimately trying to add value. And the last one, the moment you get the data scientist title, get the data analyst title, what you have done is showcasing to the marketplace that, hey, you can contribute, right? If you're just coming out of school, it is oftentimes a little harder for an employer to judge, hey, can this person solve a problem? Can this person work in a professional environment? Can they deliver under particular deadlines, contribute to a company culture? So getting the title is, in my opinion, one of the most important things you can do, regardless of kind of what you do on that job, because you can then leverage that to make different moves. Let's talk about boot camps and education. The first, as I'm saying here, formal programs, in my opinion, give you the fundamentals. And without the fundamentals, you can't solve harder and harder problems. That is more or less straightforward. But I would caution you to temper your expectations about what you think will happen after a bootcamp and a master's degree or a bachelor's degree in data science, right? Please don't just completely rely on that for your success. There's lots of other things that come into you showcasing to an employer that you can provide value, okay? Experience is better than formal education, as I said, in my opinion. And what I'm trying to communicate here is, if you have the title and you're solving a particular problem, it might be in a very niche field, but when someone goes to hire you and you can explain what it is that you were doing on that job, you might have gone very deep, let's say, into computer vision for detecting products in a warehouse. That's a very, very specific problem. But there are many things that you learn about that entire pipeline that you can abstract and take somewhere else, right? Which is oftentimes very different to the project that you'll end up doing, let's say, in school or through a bootcamp, because those particular projects don't get deployed into a production environment. And if you plan to be in the data space or the data science careers, whatever you want to call it, you want to make sure that you can think as much about production environments as possible, because otherwise you're more or less doing research at that point. Next, if you do join these programs, make sure that you're going to connect with a lot of people. And when I say a lot of people, meaning you have many opportunities for people to see you and for people to basically pull you into a company because they're like, wow, this person can do such a great job. They're great to work with. They deliver on time, great attitude, bring them in, okay? Projects, cookie cutter projects, and focusing on deployment. Most times when you go to school, boot camps, you'll be doing a project that all the other hundreds or thousands of graduates have done or working on the same data sets and whatnot. And one way to separate yourself is to focus on how can I change this project into a deployment, right? How can I showcase to an employer that I can not only do the modeling component of data science, let's say, I can actually get a model to production, right? So take those projects that you did in those programs and try to extend it. It doesn't have to be a lot, but if you just put up a generic project that everyone else has, you basically are not differentiating yourself. And then the last one I put, connections matter as much as the education. And this has been key for myself in terms of how you move along in the marketplace and how your reputation is sort of perceived. So make sure you're investing as much time into your core skills as much as you're doing in your networking. A lot of people want to find mentors. And that's a question I often get. The first one, please don't ask someone to be a mentor. That's my opinion. Other people may say otherwise, and that's perfect. The people that I tend to sort of ask, or people who have become my mentors, they oftentimes don't have much time. And the way that you get someone to be a mentor, non-formally or without saying, hey, can you be my mentor? You essentially want to try to provide value. So for instance, if someone is working on an event, volunteer for that event. Volunteering has been the number one key to my success because it has put me in touch with many different people, and I've done my best to provide value for those people. And in return, those people have guided me along in my career, and I've opened certain doors based on my reputation with them. Okay. When you finally get to add value to someone and someone agrees, right, that this is a trial and error process as you communicate with different people, it is also a numbers game. Okay. You don't want to spread yourself thin, and you always want to make sure to deliver value. But also, the higher up the ladder that you go in terms of asking people who are in higher positions for mentorship and what mentorship means, you will have to be brutally efficient with the time that they have, because oftentimes they have a lot to deliver. And what you have to think about is, imagine if 1,000 people ask them to be their mentors. Why should they choose you? And I'm personally a very brutally honest person with myself, and that's how I've sort of been trained through my academic training and whatnot. So if some of that comes off, that's what I'm trying to communicate, meaning just be kind of brutally honest there about why should someone mentor you. In addition, you should also be clear about what is in it for that person, but also what do you want to get out of the relationship. Okay. And as you silently evaluate that for yourself, and then you communicate with someone and you ask, or you figure out how can I add value, then you use that adding value to get some of the mentorship that you want, right? And that mentorship will come from you asking particular questions, let's say about their outlook on the marketplace and what you think you should do in your career. When it comes to a technical mentor, that's slightly different. This is more of a career mentor and someone who can sort of grow with you as you grow in your career. But technical mentors will also sort of follow a similar path in terms of you contributing, let's say, some type of code, or you're doing documentation, and then that person says, oh, Mark is actually a useful data scientist. Okay, I can maybe spend some more time mentoring him or whatever the case may be. So that's kind of how it works. When it comes to growing your network, and you'll hear me say this a lot throughout the presentation, is be as useful to as many people as possible. And useful is a very personalized thing. So when, for instance, if I meet a CEO of a company, I have to think about what does he really want to accomplish? He wants to grow his business. He wants to find good people to join his company. He wants to find customers. He also wants to understand the marketplace, the risks and whatnot. So depending on what I'm doing, I will tailor my conversation to that person to make sure that I'm aligning with what they need and not necessarily what I want. Next, a nice thing to do is to help other people find jobs. I put this asterisk here about even if you're looking, meaning, all right, if I'm applying for data scientist position, I'm not necessarily going to share that out too often because you're going to increase the pool of competition. But if there's, let's say, a principal data scientist role or a senior VP role, I'm happy to forward that to someone who I think would qualify. And that way I'm also helping the community and people grow, because once that person gets into that position, they can also pull you back into the business as well. So those are good things to keep in mind. The hardest thing for any employer is to find good people. And what good people really means is reliable, they're part of the culture, they go above and beyond, and they're just a pure joy to work with, right? And when a business hires you, you always have to keep in mind there's some inherent risk in hiring people, right? And monetary risk in addition to maybe legal as well. And lastly, I've mentioned before that a lot of my value or a lot of my successes come from volunteering, and that's what I tend to lead with first, right? Can I help you with this conference? and you'll do a ton of work for free. And now you've gotten good grace with particular people in the industry. Okay. Here are some don'ts of networking. When you communicate through text, you always want to be respectful of someone's time. And the way that you do that is being hyper aware of how you are communicating with someone. So if you reach out to someone on LinkedIn and you get a response or you get a connection, don't ask, hey, how are you? That's not effective. It is not fruitful for that person. So imagine that person makes $5,000 an hour. Okay. And this is like a CEO of some super large company. And he said, hey, how are you? What has that done? Okay. You are now distracting that person and they don't really know you. So why should they tell you how they are? Right. That's not what we're about right now. And you are trying to showcase how you can deliver value. Okay. So when you speak to people, and I like thinking about communicating as if I'm communicating to the CEO of a Fortune 5 company, not even one Fortune 5. And that way it frames your mind into how can I be efficient? How can I showcase how I can add value and, just get to the point. So here's a nice one that you can take. Hi, so-and-so, hope things are great, right? So you are communicating that, hey, hopefully that your life is going well, and you're showcasing that you're not just trying to grab something from the person. You actually do care, like, hey, things okay, and whatnot, but you're not wasting the valuable time of that person for them to just say something that does not inherently add value to them. Okay, so think about adding value to the person. In terms of guarding your reputation, each job that you go to, people do talk. Some industries are much smaller than others. So you want to make sure that your reputation, you have a certain reputation. People know you for doing a certain quality of work, for delivering on time, for just being a great value add to a particular team. When you're leaving a company, my personal advice is to attempt to exit as gracefully as possible. Sometimes that is not necessarily always possible, but in most cases, you want to try to do that. And the way that you do that is don't leave your team in a bind. If you're on a project, try to finish it off, try to transfer knowledge. You can capture a ton of videos. That's a big thing I like to do is to just video record a lot of my knowledge when I leave. Because at the end of the day, it's about people. You've worked with people. You might not like your boss, but your teammates are still there, and their lives depend on the particular project that you probably were working on. So that's just my take on it. So take it or leave it. Next, I said this a lot so far, but hopefully you get the point, right? Think about the person that you're speaking to, that they earn a ton of money and their time is super precious. And when you go to ask for advice from someone, make sure you've done some type of research. I would be very careful about asking generic questions. Try to make it a little more, try to showcase that you've done some research and you want to get some not only personalized advice or personalized perspectives, but you understand the background of that person and the possible perspective that they can bring to you in return for what you've done for them. Salaries, this is probably top of mind for everybody. Everybody wants to make the money. And the first thing I would say is the 6-figure salaries, they're not hard to come by, but you also have to be honest with yourself about, the nature of the business that you're going to. So for instance, you might go to some startup and be like, oh, they don't want to pay me 6 figures, blah, blah, blah. The damn people don't have any money. Okay. So you also have to be honest about where you go to try to get a 6-figure salary. Then you might go to the big companies and get pissed off that they're not just getting you or giving you a 6-figure salary. And sometimes it comes down to what you negotiate, but it also, that's sometimes the market as well, right? So I'm not saying don't try to go for your big salaries, but also understand what's happening around there. And you always want to think about having as much leverage as possible. A quick note for those who are seeking visas, so like international students and whatnot, in my opinion, as I went through my journey getting sponsored, you take the job that will get you the sponsorship. Sometimes it's hard to look at the salaries because it might not be exactly what you want, and that's okay. Get in the door, prove you can add value, And that way you can try to open different doors to a higher salary. And if you do good work, you tend to get rewarded if you communicate your value to the leaders of that business. And if you don't, you're always welcome to go somewhere else. Okay. When you go to ask for your salary, ask for it. That's fine, but just be prepared for the answer. Be prepared to justify why you think you should get paid that salary. Bringing up the Glassdoor numbers is not typically usually enough. It helps if you have some other data points on the outside. So that's why networking helps a lot. Okay. And lastly, the education. If you come and say, I have a master's degree, I should get paid this, and you're fresh out of school, put yourself in the shoes of a hiring manager. When they go to hire someone, I tend to think about like 2x the salary. So if I'm asking for 100K, that means I'm going to cost the business 200K. And that person who's hiring me has now taken the risk, right? So you can't just hire someone and fire someone. Like, it's not that easy if that person does not deliver or work out or whatever the case may be. So the barrier to entry is a bit higher just to mitigate the risk of that person not delivering value for the business. Okay. So as you think about the story that you bring for a particular salary, try to find other things other than your education that showcases that you are qualified to do the job, or that you can actually get it done even if you mightn't be fully qualified. A nice four-letter acronym, SACS, SACS, that I think is sort of crucial to your success: skills, attitude, connections, and your story. So foundation, you must have the skills. If you don't have the skills, you might get into the door and you don't know if things will work out. But ultimately, the stronger you are technically, and even if you're going for more or less like a non-technical role, but the more you understand technically, the better edge that you have and the higher value that you may be able to bring to a business. Next, when it comes to your attitude, I'm just sharing my personal sort of approach is to be as open as possible. When I join a team, you're joining a team. You're not joining, hey, this is my job, I'm not doing this, you doing that. No. Like, you get shit done. Okay. And that's how you differentiate yourself. And you take feedback, even if someone is telling you something that you don't necessarily agree with. You try to remain objective, pull the things out that you need to improve on, and move on. If someone's attacking you, there are different strategies for avoiding all of those things. Next is your connections. And once again, my intention of this presentation is to, pretty much beat some things into your brain. And the connections are super important when it comes to who knows you and who knows the value that you can bring to different businesses. And lastly, your story. So when you meet different people, they'll ask you your background and whatnot. So it's very good for you to rehearse your story in terms of your capabilities and being very, very brief about how you can communicate, you can add value to a business, right? And adding value to a business could be same thing in academia. You're going for a research position or something like that. That is also, school is a business and a researcher needs to make money. So this story coming from not only your education, but also maybe some of the things you've tried in your projects, maybe people you've communicated with, or any other type of activity that can showcase, hey, I can go above and beyond. Okay. Here's a quick snapshot of my data science story / journey. I came to the States in 2006. I went to Florida Tech, so a small school. So what I want you to, if you go to a small school, you can use this as a data point. And I like to look at people's career paths as, I'm building my own model on what I think my success will be based on different people's paths that they have taken. So I come to the States in 2006 to do chemical engineering. I didn't necessarily care about chemical engineering. It was sort of a great opportunity. I thought they got paid the highest in terms of the engineering, and I didn't know what I wanted to do. So that's what I chose. And a big part of, I think, your success in data science is really knowing yourself, knowing what you like, knowing what you're good at, what you're not good at. And I put here, I was kind of useless as a programmer in my bachelor's. I really didn't know how to program. Not because I couldn't, just because I wasn't necessarily exposed, nor did I honestly care to. And after I graduated, didn't necessarily get a job as an international student. If you are an international student, you know how hard and stressful that can be. I was fortunate enough to get a scholarship to do my master's. So I chose systems engineering just because they didn't have much prerequisites. Not a super big fan of school. And I was fortunate enough to meet my advisor there who introduced me to machine learning, right? And one of the other things I want you to take away from at least my story is the more you network, the more you come into contact with people who can help guide your journey. And people, no one really makes it on their own. It's really about the people that help you along the way. So I finished that. I thought I was going to get a job at Microsoft. That didn't work out. So I decided to do my PhD because I actually really liked working with my advisor. Didn't necessarily have any other options. And if you don't know what international students face, is basically if you don't finish a degree, you get deported. So another piece of this story is once you start something, do your best to finish it. It is a little easier if you're going to get deported, so you have to finish it. And then during my PhD, I focused on computer vision, not necessarily from a deep learning standpoint. And then I got my first internship in my PhD at the end of my PhD. And I started working for a railroad company doing data science. So another point in the story I want you to take away is that, internships are super important, but don't give up, right? I got my first one in the last year of my PhD. That does not mean that I did not try the entire time. Things just didn't work out. But once you keep working hard and keep knocking on different doors, you never know what can really happen. So I worked in the railroad industry for 2 years, and then I went to work for LucidWorks, an enterprise search and recommendations company. So, completely switched fields. You got a nice salary bump. I work remote, tra-la-la. And from there, after 2 years, now I'm at NVIDIA doing deep learning for retail, but I also started doing sort of customer facing work in higher education and research, right? So that's just a quick snapshot of my own journey. But many of the doors that were open for me, or the way that I got into, let's say, all these different companies, really came from networking. And the other point I want you to walk away with is people always told me, don't get all your degrees at the same school, and probably worse yet, at a smaller school. And I think I always kept that in the back of my mind, and that pushed me to work a lot harder to disprove that point. So I'm very grateful to say that I've sort of disproven that in terms of the success that you can get. Okay, so it doesn't matter if you come from a small school and whatnot. Just make sure that you put yourself out there, you network, and things will work out if you don't give up. So this next set of the presentation, we're going to talk about becoming the best data scientist you can be, and the way that I'd like you to approach these particular slides, almost like daily reminders. Some you'll use every day, some you won't use every day, but they'll hopefully guide you on your journey, right? This is both you starting as a data scientist or as a professional, and there's always constant improvement on different levels to get to. The first is the job of a data scientist. As I'm saying here, you have to provide value. That's it. Right? It's not about your education, where you're qualified, how much you get. Well, how much you get paid does matter in terms of your cost to the business, but your job is to solve some type of problem using data, and better yet, try to solve an impactful problem, if possible. Working on non-impactful problems doesn't necessarily do well for your own career progression. So try to get on projects that do have high impact and have high visibility, but make sure to deliver, because you don't deliver, it can also work out the other way as well. Learning something quickly. As a data scientist or someone in the data space, it is important for you to sort of understand the fundamentals. Data is data. Math is math, as I'm saying here. So if you have those good fundamentals, you can move from one industry to another, because it's just different data. You're applying very similar principles in terms of machine learning algorithms, machine learning techniques, but also the key part is you understanding the problems of that domain and the impact of solving those problems within the domain, in addition to how does that particular domain work and all the constraints that you have to operate within. And lastly, if you have that firm understanding of how different algorithms work, you can hop into a new industry and pick it up quite fast. I would say learn data engineering, just because depending on the team that you get to, you might end up having a bunch of data engineers on your team, so they can handle a lot of the data movement. Sometimes you work in a smaller company and that will not be the case. So you work with data every day. So it is important for you to understand how it's stored. Data formats are quite important when it comes to production, things like precision, data flows, where is data coming from, how is it being communicated across different processes, now through different containers in microservices architectures. So that's something you want to educate yourself on, and you can educate yourself, right? Not necessarily, you might not get that in school or a boot camp, so keep that in mind. And you should aim to be a full stack data scientist. In terms of when you go to work for a smaller company, you have to do more. And the less you can do is the less impacted you can essentially have. Being useful is always a good thing, right? Sometimes you might end up spending a lot of time writing data engineering pipelines or pipelines to just gather data and pull data from different devices, let's say, and not necessarily doing more machine learning, modeling type work. And that's okay. You're gaining another skill set and you're adding value to the business. So focus on that as you get into a particular job. And lastly, when you go to production, the type of data that you're working with, the flow of that data, the format of that data, and different non sort of machine learning like things matter a lot for you to get performance in production. So just keep that one in mind. I got this advice from Ian Goodfellow, the guy, super famous Ian Goodfellow. And this was the one question I asked. And I asked him for some advice, and he was like, read papers. And I do struggle to read papers. So I'll sort of formally put that out there. I don't claim to be an expert paper reader, but I do appreciate the value of reading papers, and it is hard. So if you do struggle with it, welcome to the club. But ultimately, it helps to have a fair amount of colleagues who can help you read papers. That's some other advice I got from some senior researchers who are much higher in the game than I am. And then the other thing to think about is publishing is a game, meaning there are many grad students that their lives are tied up, and for them to get out, they have to get a particular publication, and they just have to get a publication. Sometimes they have to get a really good one, and oftentimes they just have to get one. So they're just trying to get something out as quickly as possible. Not saying they're not doing quality work, but keep that in mind as you read different papers as well. And if possible, try to implement more than you read, just to make sure you're cementing the things that you're reading. Once again, that is not easy, so don't feel too bad if you're not doing it all the time. And sometimes you just don't have time to do it. It does take some time to implement a paper. And not every paper that you read, you're going to implement. Next is writing clean code. If you're not a great programmer, I would say, like myself, I'm not a hardcore programmer. Writing really clean code is a good way to at least appease the people who are much better in programming than you. And you kind of show clarity of thought, but in addition, you're doing things that you are also good at, right? So try to do your best to comment code so that someone else who's coming into that code base can actually pick it up. And once again, just be diligent about it, right? Keep practicing writing clean code all the time. Something I like to do when I see a new code base, I don't understand maybe what's going on. I take a copy of that code, and then I just go in and almost comment every line, so I can sort of speak to myself about how things are working. And that's a nice way to also pick up new programming styles and whatnot. So keeping reusable code snippets, if you're not necessarily doing this today, definitely attempt to, because there's lots of code blocks that you would reuse. Let's say loading a CSV, doing plots, different types of things. And if you put it in a notebook, share it. Sharing is really one of the lifebloods, I would say, of any community, but more so the data science community. Knowing math is quite pivotal, in my opinion, right? Many libraries now, or machine learning libraries, have made machine learning a lot easier, but also you will come across different problems where the out-of-the-box things that you have access to, like the scikit-learn or TensorFlow and PyTorch, those standard, let's say, objective functions won't work. So it does help for you to understand why a particular algorithm works, when it does work, when it does not work. And if you can figure out how to extend it to the different domains that you were involved in. So don't just use the software. This comment around posting common projects really has its legs in you positioning yourself in the marketplace. This is a little more so when you don't have a lot of work experience or coming just right out of school. If you do post common projects on GitHub, that does not necessarily signal to an employer that you can do something outside of the box, right? So for instance, if I didn't give you as much data, what would you do? If I gave you a lot of data, but it wasn't that clean, what are you going to do? So showcasing the ways that you would handle those problems is very important. It is not easy to necessarily showcase them. That's why if you do it, you instantly sort of separate yourself from the pack. I do think it's probably better to put nothing, right? If you put another housing prediction thing up there, someone might just think, hey, you just copied this from someone, right? And notebooks are so freely available. So be a little careful, right? Don't hold this as a hard and fast rule, but think of ways to differentiate yourself. And this last one, posting Google Colab notebooks. If you put, I think some platforms give you the ability to post a link to load that notebook into Colab. That's a really nice experience. So someone can just load your notebook and get things running. And that's a great way to serve the community as well. And by serving the community also gives back to you. Okay. Yeah, if you haven't learned deep learning, definitely learn it. I would say it does not solve everything, but people really are interested in that skill set. And I think that was one of my biggest struggles going through my PhD. And I didn't necessarily do a lot of deep learning. So when I did try to hit the marketplace, that was a barrier to entry in some of the jobs that I tried to go after. So it really does help if you do have that skill set, but I wouldn't necessarily say that's the only skill set that gives you success. But realize what's happening in the marketplace and use it to sort of your advantage. Okay. Deploying models, I would say, is probably one of the most fundamental skills that you must have as a data scientist, probably even more so than modeling, oftentimes because you might not get as much time to model or to come up with some specific model. You might be using an out-of-the-box model and tuning it really well. But then if you can't get it to production, it's not as useful, right? And you can't show as much value to the business. Yeah, definitely learn about Docker, how ports work on containers and machines, web servers, Linux, and all that fun stuff. And then if you're looking at deployment, I encourage you to look at NVIDIA Triton. That's their inference server. And TensorRT, that's a way for you to optimize deep learning models to run really fast in production. If you do have cloud experience, I think it does give you an edge over other people in the marketplace, simply because many businesses are moving to the cloud. So you have to learn to push and pull data from these remote servers. Your first step should be just go try to launch a cloud instance. You typically get some type of credits. Look up someone's tutorial, launch an instance, push a data set up there, create a small Streamlit app, and just showcase that. Capture it as a video so you're not spending the cloud time all the time, and post that on your GitHub or your LinkedIn in your featured section. There are many different ways that you could use that to showcase value. And one of the things that will benefit your data science career or any data career is really learning the command line, right? And understanding how to work on remote machines, understand your memory management, understanding how to install software, and understanding the actual Linux directory structures is very helpful. Being as technical as possible, this comes down to, call it job security, right? You tend to see people get released or fired from a job in businesses that are a little smaller. And so, for instance, you might be in a hyper growth startup, but the market doesn't pan out very well. So the startup has to sort of contract to make sure that they keep the business afloat. And oftentimes the non-technical team members tend to get cut first. So if you want to sort of make sure that you have I don't want to say a safe place, but you remain as valuable to the business as possible, be as technical as possible. And that doesn't mean you don't get to do non-technical things, but having both of those is always a benefit. In addition, if you can code anything you want, that's always cool. And lastly, you should aim to both sell and be technical. That is really a rare skill, and it doesn't mean, if it does not come naturally to you, it doesn't mean that you can't strive towards that, right? And sales is really the lifeblood of the economy, is lifeblood of your business. So it's not only the algorithms that you create. And if you learn to sell, you have to sell to your boss and do other things as well. So it's not only selling to customers. Question of the day: should you get a PhD or not? I would say if you're not doing research, you don't necessarily need a PhD. If you go into top research labs, you will tend to need a PhD. But ultimately, if you decide to go for one, in my opinion, your enjoyment and your success depends almost solely on the advisor that you get, right? They really make or break the PhD. And this is coming, at least from my perspective, of someone who doesn't really know exactly what you want to do in your PhD. This is not like you're probably a Ian Goodfellow where he knew exactly what he wanted to do and his advisors are just like guides for him to get to where he's going. So that's very different. So you also have to know yourself. One thing to keep in mind is that you do inherit your advisor's reputation and network. So the connections that they have, their standing in the academic marketplace, you will now be indoctrinated into that particular family, and you typically refer to your advisors as your fathers, mothers, grandpas, and whatnot. And there's this lineage across all the different educators in the PhD space, which is kind of interesting as well. But if you go do a PhD, get in and get out as quickly as possible, right? Unless you are really fascinated by that particular subject and you want to sit down there and enjoy that learning, definitely mad respect to you. And the way to get out quickly is to follow your advisor's lead, right? If you think about it, getting a PhD is getting 4 or 5 people to agree to give you entry into a club. This is you passing your classes and all that fun stuff. But when you go to defend if your advisor is invested in the success of that project, they will tend to help formulate defenses around the work that you're doing, right? If you go do something that's completely orthogonal to something that your advisor is in, you don't have someone knowledgeable to help you with that problem as you try to develop your research, right? But if you follow something that your advisor is doing, that person is invested in it, they'll help you out and you'll move faster. And then when someone says, hey, this is crap, you're like, no, like I'm continuing this guy's research. And it's a lot better to, I would say faster in my opinion, to get out that way, right? And once you have a PhD, you can go study and publish and do whatever you want. You don't need a PhD to publish, by the way. So keep that one in mind. All right, how do you get a PhD? This is from a US perspective. Typically, you have to get at least 2 conferences and 2 journal papers out, depending on the program that you're in. They have to be, top tier journals, which is not, and conferences, which is not hard. Not easy. And if you do get sometimes like a top conference, that does end up counting as a journal as well. So the steps are, you find an advisor. I advise interviewing them before, talking to them, getting a feel, and really get to try to know them as a person. You apply for the program, you get admitted, and then you start choosing your area of research. I would recommend you start writing from day one. So as you read a paper, write a paragraph summary. Day one, you go find out what's the dissertation, LaTeX template. You load that up and just start putting stuff in there, put notes in there, because you'll end up using all of it at the end. Once you finish your classes, you'll have to study this thing called a qualifying exam. Your advisors and your committee will give you a bunch of books and say, read all of these books and be ready to answer any particular question. It is meant to cause you an immense amount of stress, but that stress is forcing you to go learn the breadth of the field, right? So when you go to get your PhD, you have to be able to cover a large base of things. So forcing you to do that through an exam is the way that it's done. Once you get past that, you continue doing your research, you finish your classes, and then you go to your proposal. Once you finish your proposal or go up for your proposal, you should be at least 70% complete. That's how most programs that I'm aware of tend to work. And once you do pass that exam, it's a grueling exam in front of your advisors where they pretty much try to tell you that your research sucks, it's useless, blah, blah, blah. And that's them stress testing you about, do you actually know what you're talking about? Do you understand the field that you're in? And once you do pass that, you become what's called a PhD candidate. And then I think your advisors have, they treat you a little differently at that point. And that's just part of the culture. Don't get pissed at it. It's interesting. And then once you finish your final defense, you're almost officially out. And then lastly, most people actually pass their defense, which you defend your research in front of your committee, blah, blah, blah. But sometimes they don't finish a document and then they're ABD, right? All but done. Just finish your damn document. It's hard, but get it done and finish your process. Okay. As an employee, as anyone who's interacting with a business or just in general in life, try to provide 10x returns either to your customers, to your company, whatever the case may be. So if you work for a company, think of the work that you're doing as providing 10x the value of your salary. That's a good gauge, in my opinion. And if you can do that, then you're really proving yourself to be useful or as useful as possible to the business. I tend to assume a cost of 2x your salary. So when you go to ask for certain things, or you think about the revenue that you should bring to the company so that you keep getting the money that you want, that's a good first number at least, right? So at least, hey, the work that I've done is covering my salary. You should be keeping me. And lastly, you should be able to communicate that value. So a nice thing I like to do is it's called a value sheet. So you're tracking all the work that you're doing, and then you basically highlight something good that you've done, right? And you sort of keep that away. So when you come up for a review and whatnot, you basically send your manager, like, here's all the things that I've done that are notoriety or noteworthy, and you sort of bring a case for why you should get a promotion and all these types of things. Being humble, this is quite simple. I don't think it's very easy sometimes to do. But what I'm trying to communicate here is, just be cool, right? It doesn't matter what degrees you have. Like, I personally don't like people to know that I have a PhD, just because I want people to feel comfortable. And I ask really silly questions all the time, but please don't ever make someone else feel stupid by taunting your knowledge. That's quite rude, and no one likes to work with people like that. And if someone doesn't understand something, take the time to explain it to them. I think it really helps, because they will also adopt that attitude and help someone else out to understand something. Okay, so please allow some stupid questions, and because you're going to ask a lot of them at some point. And ultimately, this has been a big one thing I didn't put on the slide is no job is above you, right? So as you think of your success in your career, one of the, I think, turning points in my own career was I reached out to this conference. It was like $3,000 personal development conference. And I said, hey, even if I have to clean toilets, I'll come, because I didn't have the money to go as a student. But I was trying to volunteer, right? And I was able to volunteer. And that led to me meeting a lot of other people who've given me great connections to do this video that I'm doing now. But I came with the attitude of, it doesn't matter what I need to do to succeed, I'm going to get it done. So if you adopt some characteristics of that attitude, I think you'll be able to get a lot more success in your career. Being useful, while this may seem straightforward, this is also similar to the attitude before. When you join a company, it's not only to do your job, right? You are part of the team. And a company is just a group of people making a bunch of decisions to grow a business as much as possible, or be happy, depending on the value structure or the aim of that business. And I think you should ultimately try to add as much value as possible by doing what it takes to help the team succeed. This may sometimes mean doing more than another person, and that person might get paid more than you. But in the end, you want your team to be successful, and you don't have to stay there forever. So if the environment is not right for you, or they're not treating you fairly, you can always leave. Okay. So that's my last point there. You set the standard, try to be as useful to the company as possible. The company does not want to recognize that, go get at the front, go find a company that will recognize the value that you bring. And don't beat up about it. Just go. Being energetic, it does make a difference when people are excited to be in your presence. They're happy. They like to see you, and bring a certain level of energy to your work. If you show up, hey, how's things going? Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's not very helpful in terms of people perceiving you as someone who can get things done. And a lot of it comes down to perception, right? When people hear your reputation, oh, all right, Mark is getting stuff done, so and so and so, and you're on it and you're doing things outside of your responsibility to try to contribute to the team. Those are the things that employers like to see. And I think anybody in general, right? So if you were hiring someone, you would love to see someone going above and beyond in your business if you were a CEO as well. Okay, machine learning is a team sport. There are many different team members that it takes to get a model to production. Like I said, don't be afraid to ask silly questions if you have a great environment where you can do so, but also learn to listen, right? There may be things that you may be doing wrong, some ways that you communicate that are not effective. This is very true when it comes to speaking to customers, the way that you communicate and present yourself and whatnot. You are putting the business at risk in terms of if you don't present yourself well or present well to a customer, you might miss that particular piece of revenue, let's say, right? So it's very important for you to be open to listening to feedback from people for yourself, but also just for your customers to find out what they want. Studying sales, I think, is extremely important, especially for data scientists, simply because machine learning is a very experimental type endeavor, right? You are not necessarily guaranteed that some model that you hire 5 data scientists paying them $150,000 each, right? So you're over $500,000 to try to get this thing to work. You're not guaranteed that it's going to work. So if you understand sales and what selling really means, is just fulfilling people's needs, okay? The nice high salary that you get is coming from salespeople in your business, or your business driving sales to its customers and driving value for their customers. So the more that you understand that particular part of the business, I believe the higher value that you can sort of bring to it. Okay. So once again, your salary exists because that your company sells. So try your best to maximize your contribution. And there's a particular sort of area in data science or in the data careers where it's customer facing, right? So where you are adding this component of, I really understand the technical things about machine learning, but I also understand the context of your business. But I can also present this to you and understand the challenges of your business and map a particular company's machine learning capabilities to solve your problem, right? That's a great skill to have. So think about that when you think of your career. I have said networking a ton, and I will say it again. The fundamental key is attempting to add value. So whenever I meet someone, I try to understand what is it that they need? How can I provide it from within my network? When I was a student, I didn't necessarily have certain skill sets that I can help people with certain projects. So I provided my contacts. So that's just me meeting more people. Oh, you need a videographer? Okay, you can get in touch with this person. Oh, you were looking for a senior data scientist when I wasn't one. Oh, I know this person, so and so. I think you'd be a good candidate. And you're just helping fulfill people's needs. And that's a great way for you to, just serve people. Don't be afraid to work for free to earn entry into someone's network. And it is my belief that, my personal belief, so don't get offended, you have to earn entry into someone's network, right? And I'll come to that, what that means with LinkedIn. And as I put here, all of my jobs have come from networking. Not necessarily saying you don't have to go through the interview process, but getting to the interview process came from knowing someone who gave you a referral based on the reputation that you had. Okay. If you take nothing, or if you take something away from this entire presentation, please just follow this rule. When you're on LinkedIn, this is especially important if you're a student or beginning in your career. Don't connect with someone on LinkedIn. I am sort of generalizing here, so just keep that in mind. But most people are very busy. People oftentimes guard their networks, and it's not about connecting with everyone. It's about being very selective about who you connect with, right? So you don't want to hit the connect button because you only have one shot. You don't get to unconnect and maybe try again. So you tend to follow them. So if you follow them, you can just follow them and you observe what they do, and you can help add value to them or figure out how you can add value. And then one thing I like to do is repost people's content that's obviously valuable for my particular network. And that way you help that person build their brand. Everyone is trying to build their brand, be it internal within a company, external, whatever the case may be. Everyone wants sort of career progression. So just keep that in mind. And once that person responds favorably, you can then reach out to say, hey, um, I've been interacting with your content and so on. So I'd love to connect. How can I add value? 3 sentences and you're good to go. This is an attitude that I like to lead with. It has served me well. Some people may disagree. No worries there. And I like to treat a company as if it were my own, meaning, oh, well, yeah, I only get paid to do this. I'm not going to do that. That's perfectly fine. And there's some cases where companies do take advantage of people. But ultimately, any company that I join, I want to see them succeed, right? So even if I'm doing work that I don't think I'm getting paid for, or I should be getting paid for, that doesn't matter, right? You're going to get it done because once that business is successful, I will get an opportunity, or you will get an opportunity to be in a place where that type of work is rewarded, or that type of going above and beyond is rewarded. Learning about your domain, this is very important. You take your skills as a data scientist, you have all your fundamentals, and now you enter, let's say, the retail domain. So you understand how things are sold online and search and recommendations. Then you go to the railroad, how the trains work, what are the constraints of that business, what are they trying to optimize. So as you enter an industry, learn as much about it as you can, because when you hop into other industries, you take lessons that you learn about how everything works, and you can piece things together quite nicely. When I say become an expert on the reality of data, what I'm trying to say here is, how does data work in the real world? How does it move? Not just with CSV files that you use in school and all that type of stuff, right? Learning about Parquet files, how things map down to memory. How long does it take data to go from a CPU to a GPU, right? There's a new paradigm where you don't communicate data through the CPU to the GPU, you load it directly onto the GPU and you keep everything on the GPU. So all of those different things are the reality of how data applications work. Working hard on yourself than you do on your job, I think this is really important for you to take care of yourself, right? Oftentimes, the company is giving you X amount of money for a particular output. Don't necessarily look at it as a period of time that you're delivering to them. Think of it as value, but ultimately, you want to make sure that you are investing in your skills, not necessarily not adding value to the company, but make sure you are also getting something out of it. And lastly, just work hard. That if you do work hard, things will tend to shake out and success will come. Dressing for success and exercising. These have been 2 keys to my success. So when I go visit my customers, I try to look as sharp as possible, just my own style. But also that comes into hygiene and things like that, right? So if I go talk to a customer that, let's say it's a $10 million deal or something, and my breath is smelling bad, or I have body odor and whatnot, and that person is just like, I don't want to deal with him. And that costs the company a $10 million deal, right? That's a very fictitious sort of example, but you kind of get the idea. Or for instance, you're in an office environment, those types of things come into play. And as you try to get into more leadership positions, you have to now be an example for other people, right? So keeping yourself a certain way and presenting yourself in a certain way is very important as you sort of move up the ladder. And when it comes to being fit, exercise is really good for keeping you sharp, de-stressing, all of those things, which you'll be doing a ton of work as a data scientist or anyone in the data career, data engineering, whatever the case may be. And my personal advice here is invest in some equipment for your home, because it'll make it a lot easier for you to manage your health. Almost getting there. It does take some time. And I think if you remind yourself it does take time, you'll beat up yourself a lot less. It'd be great if you don't beat up yourself at all. But different people have different strategies for motivating themselves. And the more expertise that you have, ultimately you can solve more problems. That's the idea there. So the more problems you can solve, it's the higher value that you can essentially bring. And when you go through your whole interviewing sort of career, and I call it an interviewing career just because you'll be interviewing at different times, don't be afraid of failing, right? When you enter an interview, bring your best self, right? That's, you would have studied. If you didn't prepare, still bring your best self and take something away from each interview. I've failed many interviews at top companies, and each time it has taught me, hey, I need to go learn about this. Hey, you should have prepared, blah, blah, blah. Oh, I'm not actually very good at answering these types of questions on the spot, so I need to work on this, those things. It's all a learning experience. And lastly, make sure you master the basics, because if you have really good first fundamentals, you can hop into many different industries very quickly without understanding much, because you understand the basics. So appreciate you listening today. And what I really want you to take away from this entire presentation is it is possible for you to break into data science. It is possible for you to have a great career. I put hustle harder because I'm personally always sort of putting myself out there and doing as much as I can, both within a business and outside of a business, to add value. So if you maybe follow some of those things, or try some of those things, you will hopefully see some success. The Caribbean Data Science Podcast is on these different platforms that you see. And I encourage you to listen to some of those interviews, and you may learn some stuff from the people there. So once again, hope you learned a lot today, and take it away and go get yours. Later.